Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the first installment, the first session of STEM So What? My name is Archie Wilmer. I'm a professor of math here on Northwest Campus, and I want to be the one that welcomes you to STEM So What? So we have a great program that is planned for you this evening, and we are actually live streaming to an overflow room because we've pretty much filled this room. And for those individuals who aren't able to be in either of those rooms, they may have an opportunity to view in what we're doing here virtually, and so on a live stream. So, welcome. What I want to do first is just introduce a few individuals who are part of the planning team for STEM So What, and answer a few questions or share with you a few points about why we're doing this. So first, our planning team for STEM So What, they're made of our dean and our faculty in the math and science division. So our dean is Dr. Greta Bowling. She's in the back there. Also on our planning team is, I'll start with Jennifer Anderson, who may not be here. She's in the overflow room. We have also Elaine Coleman, Dr. Coleman. We have Permeet Jadka. Dr. Jadka is also here. We have James Hobbs. He is not here this evening. We have Amanda Wisnat and yours truly. And so we have been planning for quite a period of time trying to plan for this event. What I want to do is just cover a few housekeeping things. So food and water is provided, so I hope you enjoy that. I hope you're able to find, if you are needing it, the vegetarian wrap. We have that. But please clean up after yourselves. We don't have people who will come around and do that for you, so we will have places to put your leftovers. The restrooms, if you haven't found them, there is one straight down this hallway and to the left, and then gentlemen to the left, just outside the door, and the first door on the right. A couple of things. Make sure you check in. Make sure if you came in that you scan the QR code and fill out some of the information in there. We really do keep track of that. There are faculty members who are going to offer some added points, some credit points. I know for those students of mine who have signed in, they're going to get some benefit from it. And some of your other professors, once you indicate that, they will get access to that attendance roster. So please make sure you check in, sign in the attendance. A couple of other things. We do have an overflow, and so we will probably see some students kind of show up here and proceed to another location over in NW05. What I also want to do is see if there are any student officers over clubs that is here that you may want to introduce yourself and introduce your club and just mention who you are and what your club is. Are there any student officers that are over any student organizations, student clubs in the room? Okay, so let me just bring the mic to you and just introduce yourself and your club.
Hello, I'm Erica Perry. I'm the president of the Christian Student Ministry. So we would love for you all to join us on Tuesdays at 11, and we're right at the end of this hall.
Great. Anyone else? Any other student officers of clubs? So there are a number of clubs on the Northwest Campus and actually throughout the college, and so we encourage you to join those. Participation, what we found is that the more you engage in activities on campus, It improves retention and it improves completion. And so we want to make sure you're aware of the clubs that would interest you. What I'd like to do now is introduce a faculty member that's going to share some insights. We call this Instructor Insights, and we're going to add this as a segment in our STEM So What sessions. We have 5 of these, including this one, planned throughout the year. So 2 this semester and 3 next semester. But for this first one, I want to introduce David Wagner up. He is an instructor in our computer science department, just to share some insights.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm Dave Wagner. I just started here at Northwest just this semester. Before that, I was working at the South Campus as an economics professor. But I came here to talk about STEM, and you're going to learn a little bit more about RNA as we talk about the program a little bit later. However, on the RNA point, necessity is the mother of invention, and usually it's when crisis or tough times come about, our level of innovation seems to spike upward in order to try and solve problems. So that is really, human needs really drive innovation. How I got started in STEM, I guess I could talk about that a little bit. I'm a lot like many of you all. I was in the military at first. I joined when I was 18. I was in the Navy for 4 years and learned a technical type of job. I was an electrician's mate. And then I got out, and then I went to college, and then I started the pre-engineering coursework there. Had a penchant for math and science, really liked it. And then at that point in time, I run into a few bumps like a lot of people do, and so there was an interruption in my education. Plus, I needed a job more than I needed to be going to school at that time. I was married, so I took a job as a stockbroker, and I worked for Equitable Financial for a number of years and enjoyed that. But also, the other thing that kind of scared me off initially was really the lack of information, especially in engineering careers. I didn't really have a whole lot of guidance then. The things that are available to people today are just enormous compared to what I had. So you had to go by word of mouth, reading journals, asking questions, and that sort of thing. Still valid today, but the internet offers a great deal out there in terms of information and answers a lot of questions. From there, I was in the financial services business for several years, and then I ran into my first personal computer. So we're talking about the very early PCs, and these were the ones with the twin floppy drives that ran MS-DOS and would run simple spreadsheet programs and some insurance and finance software that I had. But, I guess I had that natural curiosity, and I just wanted to know more about this thing that I just spent $2,000 on. And this is back in, I guess, mid-1980s. And so what I bought was an 8086 processor, which is very meager, a little tiny bit of RAM, and really no storage. But it was functional. It did what I wanted it to do. And then I started digging in and learning more about it. And then I heard about this thing called networking. So I heard about Novell networking through a lot of friends that I had who also were computer hobbyists. So we got copies of Novell Network, and we got a few network cards, and we started linking things together and thought that was pretty good. Started learning that it was starting to propagate. They started a certification program called the Certified Novell Netware Engineer type of thing. So that would be equivalent today, and I don't know, things have changed quite a bit, but I think like CCIE is a big deal. That's a Cisco Certified Internet Engineer. That's the top thing you can get with Cisco. And these guys were pulling down some pretty big bucks. And 1987 came around and the market tanked, and I said, I need to find something else. And so I started looking for jobs in IT. Initially, I had to start at the very bottom. And I got in with a company called Fast Tax, and what they had was special tax software for both commercial and individuals for the big 8 accounting firms at that time. They've been whittled down to now 4. And we'll talk about Ernst & Young and these sorts of guys if you've ever heard of any of these people. And so I learned a lot about printers. I learned a lot about networking. I was with them for 6 months, and that was my end. And it was a really meager job. It was $10 an hour at that time. We're talking about circa 1990. It's not a lot of money, but hey, I was in. And so from there, I learned all I could, and then I started applying for other jobs. And then my next one was with MetLife Healthcare. Can everybody hear me back there? I'm used to just talking to crowds like this because I've got a military voice or a teacher voice. I've been teaching for a while. Anyways, back on track. I started going to work for MetLife Healthcare as a system administrator and a database administrator, and it didn't pay very much either. But what they had for me at that point in time was college. They would pay for you to go ahead and continue to go to college. And I got about halfway through before I got out, and I got serious about wanting to go back and finish that up. So I went ahead and finished that up on their nickel. They pay for the whole thing, which means employers often have programs that will assist students. It doesn't have to be all FAFSA. It doesn't all have to be onerous student loans that you pay off for the rest of your life. There are other ways to find the money. And I was able to do so, and I finished up my degree at Dallas Baptist University. I got a BBA in Computer Information Systems and Finance, and then I went from MetLife Healthcare to another small outfit that did integration work for Novell Netware, and for a small firm for small, medium companies. Got some experience there. And then I ran to a little company that was an internet company called Optical Data Systems. And what they were good at was creating connectivity for networks. And so they also had something called managed networks. I did the interview, got the job, and all of a sudden I found myself thrusted into the big league. So I went from like 25 grand to 50 grand in about 3 years. And then I stayed with them for about 5 years, and I went on for being a systems engineer working with EDS and many, many Fortune 500 companies, many of whom still exist today, helping to design and create their networks and consult with their IT people on how to manage them. And from there, became a global account manager for that same account. I went over to the business side. And then I had the opportunity to go to Europe as the director of EDS accounts. So I worked with people in London, Munich, and Paris to talk to our customer in Europe. And so just through gritting it out and doubling down and getting in there, I was able to accelerate my career quite fast. I've seen other people along the way that have also done the same thing, and really had a lot of good mentors along the way. They gave me guidance. They showed me where to go, what to do, and I was a good listener. And what I found out afterwards was the only barrier to entry was really just hard work and being intellectually curious. If you can get past that, you can get into this business. There's just so many different avenues. IT, I don't even think I can fathom quite all the opportunities that are even exist in IT, even though I'm a subject matter expert on that, but not everything. So, there's just really a lot out there, and some of these things are blended into other disciplines as well. I would encourage everyone to learn to leverage your skill sets and, learn to love learning. I've since then attained a number of master's degrees as a result. And each one of those things have helped perpetuate my career and let's just say my overall well-being. My family's set, I'm set, but it's all on the basis of hard work and just, prudent action. So that's all I have at this point in time. I'm going to hand this back to Doctor.
Okay. Thank you. Let's give David a round of applause. Thank you. So, instructor insights. So, I was a little, have the order of this a little bit in reverse. I really wanted to share with you, why are we here? What is STEM So What? So our visionary, our originator, thought of the need to provide a forum for students to really answer this question, STEM, so what? You study STEM, you study science, you study biology, you study chemistry, you study math. So what? What's the relevance of all of these academic subjects that you study, especially in STEM? Because I think it's still misunderstood. And so we wanted to create this forum so that we can actually address that question, provide an answer. There is a high relevance, there's an important relevance of STEM, especially in today's society. And so the intent is to, and that visionary was our Dean Dr. Greta Bowling. And so over the past now 2 years, really, we have been hosting these STEM So What sessions along with the planning team and the support of our math science division so that we can answer that question. What is the relevance of STEM beyond the classroom? We want to highlight that. We want to talk about that. And so this evening is an opportunity to do that. We have 4 other things we're trying to do. Of course, answering that question, STEM, so what? The other is to inform you. One of the things that we find is that many students who are trying to choose a career, they don't have all the information they need. And so that is what David was sharing. You need information. And so even though this is a quick, short, brief session, we're trying to at least connect you to some of the information. That's why we have the library services here. You can do some things to research and extend your knowledge on STEM fields, especially in biology, which is our focus for this evening. So to inform you, we want to engage you. And so some of the things you have on the table that allows you to understand RNA, it is an engagement activity to engage in conversation, to meet other students. And so the third thing is to give you this engagement, and the fourth thing, this sense of belonging, knowing that there are other students that you may not be aware of who are interested in STEM fields. It's not that you're here just because your teacher says, oh, it's going to benefit you in your grade. So there is a real and genuine interest in STEM and in STEM careers and in STEM professions. And the last thing is to inspire you. There are opportunities for someone to walk out of this session saying, I want to do that. I want to move in that career track and do some things in biology or life science, computer science, math. And so it's not just the academics. We want to inspire you. And so even if you're not inspired, you can take this information that you're gaining and share it with siblings, with friends, and others that maybe they're interested in it and they would be inspired by it. And so that is what we're trying to do with STEM So What? And I hope that by the end of the evening, you will have been informed, engaged, inspired, and have a sense of belonging. Let me take this opportunity now to pass out some gifts and prizes. We've got some gifts and prizes for you. And so in the overflow room, if we have students there, you have an opportunity to get some gifts and prizes. And do we have some tickets here? So you should have received some tickets. Who doesn't have tickets that wanted tickets? Okay, so everyone who wants a ticket or wants to try for some prizes has a ticket. So I'll let you call out the number.
8404960. 8404960.
Okay, we have a winner. And what do we have for, do we have, oh. There's a prize outside. Oh, sorry. Okay. Yes, just right outside the door. Just, yes. Uh,
8404929.
We have a winner. All right, wonderful.
8405014.
We have another winner. Wonderful, wonderful. Any more?
8405007.
Wonderful. We have a winner. Go connect your prizes. Wonderful. Thank you, thank you, thank you. We'll let them collect those prizes and come on back in, and you might even want to share what you have. What's in the bag? I'm curious. A t-shirt. A STEM So What t-shirt. Anything else? Kind of like Christmas in October, okay? Wonderful. Okay. We are about to get to the highlight of this evening, where we introduce our guest speaker. What I want to do is actually bring up someone quite near to the guest speaker. We have a professor of history who is on Northwest Campus, and she is actually married to our guest speaker. And so I want to introduce you to Dr. Sharon Conrad.
Thank you. All right. Well, I never, ever thought I would get a chance to introduce tonight's speaker. You know, they don't give these kind of microphones to historians at these science conferences. So I am really grateful to be here. I want to thank Dean Bowling and Dr. Jopka and Dr. Wilmer for inviting me to have this opportunity to speak with you tonight. As I said, and as was just said, I am not a scientist, and so I just want to get that on the table right away. I am not a scientist. I am a historian. However, I am in a unique position to provide some of the history and my history with tonight's speaker. So that's what I'm going to do. I am not going to walk you through his entire career, because part of what you're going to hear is him sharing some of his career path and education path. So I'm going to leave that part to him. But I want to tell you a little bit about what I do know about tonight's speaker. He and I have known one another since we were teenagers. We met when we were in college, before we had any degrees, before we had any sense of where we would end up in this world, and definitely before we had jobs. We have known each other for a very long time, and I've seen his entire path. I've seen him kind of struggle with whether or not he wanted to really be a scientist. He was always interested in science, but he wasn't always sure that he had what it took to become a research scientist and professor. But I watched him with that struggle. I watched him ultimately decided he wanted to pursue that path, and he studied so hard for his GREs, and I watched him do that every night after work, come home and just practice, 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 and study. I watched him apply for graduate school, go to graduate school, struggle as a student in terms of, those days when he used to refer to them as the yeasty beasties. His yeast that he would work with in the lab weren't cooperating. And so it's not always easy, but what I learned from watching him is that, if you love it, it's worth the work. And I watched him do the work. I've been fortunate to watch him hit the highs, his achievements, his accomplishments, his publications, but I've seen him, ride the wave of writing those grants, hoping to get the funding to keep the lab going, and the thrill of victory when the grant comes in, and the agony of defeat when, sometimes it doesn't work out. But you just keep working, and I've watched him on that path. Once upon a time, I never, ever would have been prepared to pick up a microphone and speak to you all like I am today. I was a terribly scared public speaker. My voice would shake. I just despised it. I never wanted to be a teacher. I never thought I could be an educator. But because I always thought the people who spoke in front of crowds were gifted, magical people. They just had this skill set until I watched tonight's speaker. I had a front row seat to see not only how he prepared for tonight's presentation, and he did, but I've watched him over the years, and then I realized, oh, it doesn't just happen magically. You practice. I watched him prepare the slides, practice the talk over and over and over again. I mean, I didn't watch him practice tonight's talk, but I have seen it over the years, him doing that. And it just taught me that you have to prepare yourself. So I think that there is no better person to share with you the role, the path to becoming a scientist, the work. How do you translate your interest into your work, and how do you keep that enthusiasm up than tonight's speaker? So let me go ahead and do something I've never done before. So please just allow me to introduce the smartest and best Dr. Conrad in the room tonight. Tonight's STEM So What speaker is the University of Texas Southwestern Medical Center Professor of Microbiology and the Endowed Southwest Medical Foundation Scholar in Biomedical Research, who happens to be my favorite person in the world, Dr. Nicholas K. Conrad.
All right. Yep. Sure. All right. Thank you so much, Dr. Conrad. Tonight I'm going to talk to you. So just going back to my title, my title is "It's the Hero and the Villain of the Pandemic, but What is RNA?" So yeah, I kind of hooked you in with like the pandemic thing, but really this talk is about my favorite molecule, which is RNA. Okay, and my talk is going to actually be divided really into four different ideas here. First, we're going to talk about RNA. The first part of this talk is going to be kind of me geeking out about RNA, and hopefully you will enjoy some of the enthusiasm with that as well. At least some of you will. Then I'm actually going to tell you about a little bit more about this journey that the other Dr. Conrad alluded to. My journey from going from a small town, Pennsylvania, kind of a rural small town, to being a college professor, and kind of how that path went. And actually, I'm going to use that to introduce you to some of the, things like being a graduate student, being a postdoc, what that actually means. And then if I have time, I'm going to tell you a little bit more about what my actual lab does. And then at the end, I'm not just talking about myself because I'm a narcissist. I'm actually not. I'm actually using that as kind of a springboard to kind of hopefully give potential career paths for folks in your seats, in your situations, and what you could potentially do if you're interested in molecular biology. So that's kind of the outline for today. And this is me with my lab. This is a picture of me with my lab. It's an outdated picture. Several of those folks have moved on to bigger and better things since then. But yes, as was said earlier, I'm a professor of microbiology. And I describe myself as a molecular biologist who's interested in RNA and sometimes viruses, okay? And I guess the question then is, for a lot of you, what does being a molecular biologist even mean compared to kind of like what does that entail? So when you think of a biologist, a lot of us will think of like a field biologist. This is the person who he or she goes out and they look at ecology in plants and how these things interact with one another. And then, that's not quite what a molecular biologist does. And then kind of like a big jump downwards in scale, you think of a cell biologist. Now, this is a picture of a mammalian cell. And actually you have kind of a similar picture on these, the little coloring things. We did not organize this, but as you'll see going forward, this is just a wonderful kind of like complement to what I'm going to talk about. So this is great. So you can see the cell there. And a cell biologist thinks about the cell and how the cell is organized. But the molecular biologist, we go one step deeper, and we look at all of these molecules that are within the cell and how they interact with one another. Okay, and then you can go deeper too. If you're a chemist, boy, chemists can contribute a lot to biology because they're looking at the actual chemical reactions that are happening inside of cells. And if you're more on the physicist and structural side, you actually get down to the atoms and the atoms inside of biological molecules and what they do. But we're kind of in the middle here with molecular biology. And this, again, also on your sheets, is the central dogma of molecular biology. I'm going to be coming back to this like my entire scientific part of my talk is going to use this as a frame of reference, okay? So what is the central dogma? Can I just get a show of hands? How many of you have heard of the central dogma? DNA is used to make RNA is used to make protein. About half, a little bit more than half, okay, yeah. And it doesn't matter if you don't understand that. Hopefully I will help with that. So it's called a dogma, which, by the way, in science, we don't deal with dogmas, okay? That's kind of something that we don't do in science. But the reason why it's called the central dogma is because Francis Crick, who was one of the first people to kind of imagine this central dogma, when he kind of imagined it, he just thought dogma was a cool catchphrase. He didn't want to say, he thought central hypothesis was boring. And so he came upon dogma, and then later on he kind of apologized for it. He's like, I didn't really know what dogma meant. This guy's brilliant. He didn't know that. But anyway, so that's why it's called the central dogma. And there are three molecules that we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about DNA, and we're going to talk about the fact that it's used to make mRNA, and then that mRNA is used to make a protein. And we're going to talk about what all these things do. And okay, and so for those of you who actually may be a little bit closer to biology, you may know that, and this is also on your sheets, which is great, that the first step by which DNA is made into RNA is called transcription, and the step by which mRNA is used to make protein is called translation. I'm going to try I will probably default to to saying those words. I'm actually going to try not to, just because I want to keep this as simple as possible and as much for kind of a lay audience, not for people who know all about this stuff. But I probably will slip up occasionally. So let's actually take these things apart, okay? So let's first talk about DNA. So DNA, everybody's heard of DNA, I'm going to assume? Show of hands, probably everybody's heard of DNA. Y'all probably also know that it's a double helix, right? My art skills are not very good, so that's why the top on my picture is just a ladder. But just think of that ladder as being twisted because it's supposed to be a double helix. When you think about DNA, what you can think of is several things. First of all, it's the blueprint for all of your cells. Okay, it's kind of the code that encodes everything. Every single one of your cells has the same DNA. Okay, so whether it's a cell in your eyeballs or whether it's a cell in your GI tract, cells are very different, right? They have the exact same DNA. We'll talk a little bit more about that later. And DNA is also what you should be associating with genes. So genes are basically made of DNA. You've heard of genes, I'm sure. Genes, depending on who's counting and how you count, you can say that there's about 20 to 25,000 protein coding genes in a human cell. There's also about the same amount in a worm, so if that makes you feel a little humble, it certainly does for me. But we're more complicated because we have more RNA, but that's another story. And it's also the hereditary material. You get half of your DNA from one parent, half of your DNA from another parent. They come together into the cell that ultimately became you. Okay, and so that's what we're thinking about with DNA. Now I'm going to skip RNA for a second and go to protein. So when we think about protein, what we really think about is the molecular machines in a cell. So proteins are the things that do stuff. And sometimes that's kind of an abstract concept. So I'm going to give you an example. Is anyone here like me lactose intolerant? Yeah. So I'm lactose intolerant, and we'll use lactase as kind of an example of a protein that does something. So in your cells, you have one of those 20,000 genes encodes for the lactase gene. That lactase gene is used to make RNA, the lactase mRNA. I know we haven't talked about that yet, but that's the message, and then it makes this protein. So this protein, what this does is it takes this molecule, and again, you don't need to be a chemist here. The molecule is called lactose, and you get it from, there's a lot of lactose in milk, there's a lot of lactose in ice cream, and those two kind of hexagonal things, that's what makes up the lactose sugar. What lactase does is it basically, all it is you think of this big old thing as a pair of scissors that cuts this apart. And then that separates that to two different molecules called glucose and galactose. That's good for you because glucose and galactose then can be used to, as energy sources for your cells. Okay, so if you don't have that lactose or that lactase, this guy builds up and you miss out on these guys. So that's kind of an example of what I mean when I say proteins are molecular machines that do stuff. And we'll come up with another example in a little bit too. Now let's get to the star of the show. So mRNA is the message that's in the middle. So what an mRNA does is, well, M stands for messenger RNA. So it is the messenger that links the code in the DNA that's just a blueprint, kind of sitting there. DNA is kind of boring. It's just sitting there, right? Makes mRNA for that gene, and then that mRNA is decoded to make your protein. Now, compared to DNA, mRNA is actually kind of kind of unstable. So it actually goes away, whereas your DNA stays the same in your, like I said, basically forever. Your cells divide, you make copies of it. It's very stable. RNA kind of turns over a lot more. And that allows cells to kind of change what genes they're expressing. And again, on a similar idea, every cell has the same DNA, as I told you before, but different mRNAs are made in different cells. So let's go back to that lactase example. Where do you think lactase might be made? In the stomach, in the GI tract. That's exactly right. So because you're drinking your milk, you're eating your ice cream, that goes into the GI tract, it needs lactase to deal with that. The cells in my fingertips that are making my fingernails, they don't need any lactase. And so those cells don't make lactase, but the cells in my gut, actually if I weren't lactose intolerant, the cells in my gut would be making lactase, okay? And that whole concept that certain cells make one gene or turn one gene on to make RNA, and other cells, have a whole different group of genes that they turn on and off, that's called gene regulation. And that's really one thing that my lab is actually very interested in, and there's tons of labs. It's a huge field in molecular biology. So that's basically how the message is regulated. But RNA is actually even cooler than that. So RNA is actually more than a message, okay? Sometimes the RNA can function as a machine. So I told you that DNA to RNA to protein, the proteins are the machines. Guess what? Sometimes the RNA is the machine. And the coolest example of this, in my opinion, is the ribosome. Again, let's not get too caught up in what the names here are, but we need to know that the ribosome here is it's a huge molecular machine, much bigger than lactase, that is the thing that actually makes proteins, okay? DNA to RNA to protein, I told you that mRNA is decoded. The ribosome is the thing that decodes it and takes these building blocks called amino acids, puts them together to actually make a protein, okay? And if you look at the ribosome, now I'm not going to tell you the ribosome is all RNA, it's not. The ribosome is this big molecular machine that's made up of RNA and protein. here's a picture of kind of the business end of the ribosome, and it's a little bit dark here in this particular version, but the blue stuff on the outside here, those are the proteins. But if you look in this cavity, and again, it's a little bit dark here, but if you look in this cavity here, all this kind of orangish and gray, I'm looking for help. Yeah. I'm colorblind, so you could have told me this was green. I would be like, okay, whatever, it's green. So, yeah, yeah. So this cavity here, all that orange and gray, that's all RNA. The orange and gray is RNA, and that's where the proteins are actually made. So at the core of the thing that makes proteins, the actual machine doing the job, it's all RNA. So basically, RNA serves functions as some of the most important molecular machines in the cell, because cells make tons of ribosomes. It's actually a really important part of cell biology. But now we're going to go in the other direction too. So RNA can also be used as a genome. So let's forget about boring old DNA. And there's a really, and here's where we're going to get into the pandemic, because there's a really relevant example of this. Coronavirus. Coronavirus has no DNA. A coronavirus, the actual genome, is an RNA-based genome. Okay? So here's a picture of a coronavirus. And this is basically the outside, and this is kind of a cross-section where you can see on the inside. This inside bit here, this coil here, that's the RNA. It's one piece of RNA. Some viruses have multiple pieces of RNA. And, oops, that's not what I want to do. Oh, and in all my pictures so far, I've showed one piece of DNA to one piece of RNA to one protein. Viruses, particularly these kind of RNA viruses, they do kind of an interesting trick where they can take one piece of RNA and then make multiple different proteins from it. So you can see here I've got the green, blue, orange, and pink boxes, and they all make these different proteins, okay? So that enables the virus to get kind of more bang for its buck. So basically, it only has one RNA, but it can make a bunch of different proteins out of it. And then this is actually the actual coronavirus genome here. These are the different proteins that the virus makes. And I kind of forget what my next slide was. Okay. Yeah, okay. So the importance of this is that, so now that we know that coronaviruses and other viruses, there are lots of RNA viruses out there, they can basically bypass the need for DNA. So in other words, if you think about it, what that means is if we can introduce a piece of RNA into a cell, we can basically program that cell to make the appropriate protein. Okay? And then that brings along this idea of, can we actually use RNA as a therapy? Can we take a piece of RNA, introduce it into a cell that may be deficient of a certain protein, and that cell will now make whatever protein is missing, and this will help in fighting disease. And this is exactly what we're doing with an RNA vaccine. So these are the mRNA vaccines that most of us, hopefully all of us, have gotten, okay, against COVID-19. And so in more detail here, let me take a step back and say two things. First of all, I'm not a coronavirus. I actually, ironically, even though I'm an RNA guy, the viruses I work on in my lab are actually DNA viruses, and if we have time, I'll tell you a little bit more about that. But I'm also even less so of an immunologist, okay? But to introduce you to some like really fundamental immunology ideas here, this again is our friend the coronavirus. This on the outside is what's called the spike protein. And when the coronavirus infects an individual, what the immune system, quote unquote, sees is the outside of the virus. And the thing that's most prominent is the spike protein. The spike protein is this kind of pink looking thing here on the outside. And then basically, if you get an infection, the immune system ultimately will see that, recognize it, and then if you get a second infection, it will recognize it a lot more quickly. So generally speaking, on your second infection, you're actually going to do much better than the first one, and you might not even know you've been infected. Okay? Oops. So then here, going back to the coronavirus genome, this part right here labeled S, this is the gene that encodes the spike protein. And you can see it's only about, roughly about 10%. This is roughly to scale. It's about 10% of the viral genome. So basically, the way that the vaccines work is we take this spike protein and put it onto a piece of RNA, of mRNA, introduce it into cells. The cells make a boatload of spike protein, but they aren't making any virus because you're nowhere near having a full virus, right? And then this way, the immune system sees this and recognizes this as being something that's potentially an invader. So that when you do get infected by coronavirus, what happens is that it immediately sees that and it's able to quickly recognize that, okay? And one of the major hurdles in understanding this, in actually making these vaccines work, is that for the longest time, the RNA vaccines weren't working because the problem is that your immune system recognized the RNA itself as being an invader, okay? So then the whole immune system starts fighting against the RNA itself. And so none of the good stuff is going to happen. Well, the Nobel Prize just a couple of weeks ago was given to Katalin Kariko and Drew Weissman because they actually were able to overcome that problem, okay? And we can talk about that at the end if you're interested, but they did some really kind of cool stuff to figure that out. Okay. And I'm going to talk one more topic on RNA biology before kind of shifting to my story. And this is just kind of a gee whiz for fun thing because, again, as an RNA guy, I just think this is the coolest thing. And this is the idea of a prehistoric RNA world, okay? So basically what I've shown you, and this is not controversial. RNA can be used as genetic material. We actually see that, okay? That actually exists today. What else we know is we know that RNA can also be a machine. So we've got kind of the two main points of molecular biology there, right? You've got genome and you've got machine, right? And so because it can do both of these things, this leads to what folks call the RNA world hypothesis. And this idea is that all early forms of life were evolved from an RNA, not protein DNA-based life form. And when you really think about what that means in the big picture, is that means that, our ancestor, everybody here, our common ancestor, is a piece of RNA that can make copies of itself, that can mutate over time, and this initiates the entire history of life on Earth. And another way of thinking about that is if you think about evolution, so basically here on this tree of life, which is not really a tree, it's more of a bush, right? On the outsides of this is like modern times. Humans are down here in this corner, and all the existing mammals and birds, etc., back to bacteria. And what you think about this really means is that really we're all cousins. Your dog is your 27 millionth cousin, okay? So that's really, you're cousins with dinosaurs, okay? But what the RNA world hypothesis means, if it's correct, is that really your great, and say great a whole bunch of times, grandparent was effectively a piece of RNA. And again, it's a hypothesis. I think it's actually a pretty viable one, and I think it's really cool as an RNA guy. But yeah, So like I said, that's kind of the gee whiz part. So that's it for that part of the talk, and I'm actually going to move on to a little bit more of a personal side of things, a little bit more about my journey coming from small town Pennsylvania and coming to UT Southwestern ultimately as a professor. So I'm from McSherrystown, Pennsylvania. None of you have heard of it, I'm sure. McSherrystown, Pennsylvania is here between Gettysburg and Hanover. I hope that all of you have heard of Gettysburg from your wonderful history teachers here. Anyone who's taken American history here, I'm sure has heard of that. Civil War battle. It's where we went for every school trip when I was a kid. Every school trip when I was a kid, we went to Gettysburg to go tour the battlefield. And then the other part of this is Hanover, Pennsylvania, which you probably also have never heard of. But if you've ever had any of these products, it's Hanover likes to tout itself as the snack capital of the United States because we have Utz potato chips and Snyder's of Hanover. Yeah. Oh yeah. I spent a lot of time in the Appalachian Mountains. Yeah. We were big campers in the family. Yeah, absolutely. And you know, it's a blue collar town where I grew up. I mean, most folks there were either farmers or factory workers. Not a whole lot of scientists and PhDs that I grew up with. As a matter of fact, zero. Let's see here. Came from a big family. I'm the youngest of 7. That's me. And yes, it was the 70s. For the first half of his life, my dad worked in a box making factory and then the Doubleday Book Factory. There was a factory in town that made books for Doubleday Publishing. And when I was born, my dad started a small print shop. Now, the funny thing is I realized that with this crowd, y'all probably don't even know that print shops existed. Because everything you print out, I mean, we heard about that earlier. You know, you print everything out. Now, back in the day, really, if you wanted anything on a piece of paper that wasn't handwritten, you'd have to go to a printer, and they would actually print stuff for you, like a resume, for example. Or we printed, if you go to a funeral, the funeral cards where, you know, it has like, we did a lot of business for that. There was a lot of different things that you know, a printer was needed. Now, the other thing I want to point out is you might think that sounds somewhat sophisticated, but in Dad's shop, this machine right here is called a linotype. Okay. In Dad's shop, we were using a linotype very often, daily. This is 1890s technology. Okay, so, and this was like in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, okay? And we were still using a linotype. It was actually one of the last 50 to be used in the United States, actually for commercial purposes. They were, like when I was a kid, I would go to my dad's shop and I would see this, and then I would go to Smithsonian for a school field trip and I would also see it. And that's not a joke, that actually happened. And actually, I included this picture to prove that I actually was able to use the linotype. And now I'm realizing none of y'all are going to believe that skinny guy with hair was actually me. So maybe that's not very good proof. But yes, that was me when I was probably 16-ish. And my mother worked retail, and she was stay at home, you know, with 7 kids. She stayed at home quite a bit. And as was said earlier, you know, just as a kid, I was just like the geeky kid who liked dinosaurs. I loved like all the nature shows. I really just liked biology. I never really saw myself in that role, though. I just thought the stuff was cool. And I am technically a first-generation college student. However, I kind of almost don't feel like it because a lot of my older siblings also kind of paved the way for me. So I had that as an advantage in terms of kind of understanding a little bit better how the system went than I would have. As a matter of fact, without particularly my oldest brother, Joe, here, who, you know, I was 2 when he went off to college. You know, he was a math guy. And he really kind of fostered kind of the, supported me in kind of my idea of liking science. And he also went to Penn State, and I am definitely a Penn Stater, and that's where Sharon and I met. My major was biochemistry, and here's where actually my sister, who also had gone to Penn State, basically I was interested in biology, and she talked to some of her friends who were scientists, and they were kind of like, well, biology's good here at Penn State, but really like the molecular biology and biochemistry, these were like the more rigorous. You can always go from biochemistry to biology, but it's harder to go from biology to biochemistry, okay? And so based on just like this kind of superficial advice that some dude gave my sister, I decided to try biochemistry. And my goal was to get a job as a technician. My goal was not to be a professor. It was very, that wasn't even on the radar. And because of that, I'm sure, how many of you have heard of imposter syndrome? Yeah, so the imposter syndrome really crept in because I was hanging around with a lot of the other biochemistry students. These were kids, like we didn't have, at my high school, we didn't have like advanced placement courses or I guess what y'all call dual credit courses and all. We didn't have any of that. And I felt way behind. And I was really nervous that, there's also that old adage, you rise to the level of your incompetence. And I was sure that Penn State was going to be the level of my incompetence and I wasn't going to get out of it. And of course, we contrast that with, how many of you heard of Dunning-Kruger syndrome? So that's a little less known. That's kind of the opposite side of the coin. And as a guy who stands here and, notice when I was talking about immunology and coronavirus, I basically went out of my way to tell you, I'm not a coronavirus specialist, okay? And yet I go online on Twitter, and there's a whole lot of people who are significantly less qualified than me who are telling me exactly how coronavirus works, wrongly. That's Dunning-Kruger at work, okay? So you think you know a lot, mostly because you don't know that much to know that you don't know anything. So stay away from that too, but I think particularly among people I know, this is the more pervasive idea. So as a student, I got good grades. I wasn't a 4.0 or anything. I never really I did some lab work, but again, in order to get into a lab and do research, you pretty much had to do it for credit. And if I was there for a summer, I needed money. So I worked in labs, but I washed dishes. So, and they would pay you to wash dishes. They wouldn't pay you to do experiments. You could do that for credit. So when I graduated, I had decent grades, but I just didn't quite have enough lab work. And so that leads me to the next step, where I worked as a lab tech at NIH at the Navy Medical Center, and this is in Bethesda, right outside of DC. Now, again, one reason why I did this is because I thought I needed more experience, and I just wanted a job. The second reason was there was this intelligent, beautiful, wonderful woman who also happened to was moving to the DC area, and if she would have gone to Alaska, I would have followed her there. Yes, that's the other Dr. Conrad. If it wasn't, I'd be in big trouble. Actually, Sharon was working at the Smithsonian at the time, and then so I focused my job search on the DC area. But the important thing here was that this was really, 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 really important for me. At this stage, this is where I learned how to do lab work. Even a really well-designed classroom lab experience, it's not the same. And I was okay at those, and that was also feeding my imposter syndrome that I couldn't do this because I didn't really like them that much. And I knew you were supposed to like lab work in order to go down this route. Well, as it turns out, they really don't reflect what happens in a real lab. This taught me, first of all, it helped me develop a lot of skills. It taught me that I actually liked it, and then I started to get more confidence that I could do it. And then my work there got my name on several publications. And with all of those three things put together, actually, there's a fourth thing that was mentioned in the introduction. Back then, we had, like, a lot of schools don't take GREs anymore. But back then, we had to take GREs, and I studied a lot during that time and took the GREs then. We even had to take subject test GREs, which they went they went away a long time ago. But because of this, I decided, hey, maybe I do want to go to graduate school, okay? And now, this was the national cancer, this was the lung cancer biology section. So I was doing actual cancer research at this point. And I see this with our graduate students now. You know, when you've done one thing and you see that thing is cool, you know that's what you want to do. So I knew I wanted to go and be a cancer biologist. And so I got into a much better, there's no way coming out of Penn State that I could have gotten into Johns Hopkins. That's what I got into there largely because of the work I did at NIH. No way I would have gotten in out of Penn State. Not a chance. And that's not imposter syndrome, that's just facts. So, and here's where I want to introduce you a little bit to the idea of what happens in grad school, because I know I certainly didn't know. So in grad school, the first year, you're usually doing rotations and you're taking some sort of core course. Core course is kind of like a catch-all for like all sorts of molecular biology and genetics and biochemistry and all the stuff that you're supposed to know. The other thing you're doing that's even more important is you're rotating through different labs. Most schools, you'll have like 3 different rotations that you'll take, and you basically get to work in that lab for like 2 months, 6 weeks, something like that. It's different at different places, but that's not important. You know, you just basically get to try these things out. And indeed, when I was a student at Hopkins, my first rotation was in a cancer biology lab. But then after that, through taking the core course, I realized that yeasts were an incredibly fun model system that you could learn a whole lot about biology. And I started to learn that RNA was cool. And so I ended up in Dr. Jeff Corden's lab. And, you know, this really got me down the kind of basic science road as opposed to doing kind of cancer biology. I did well as a graduate student in terms of publications. There was plenty of up and down moments. I won't detail them. We don't have time for that. But yeah, it's not like this was just like this super easy stretch. And then I went on to do, the one other thing that I wanted to point out is a lot of times in the biological sciences, they're different from other disciplines in the sense that you won't get a master's, you'll go straight to a PhD. That's what I did. Other disciplines, you have to get your master's first. So I don't have a master's degree. You just kind of go straight to the PhD. So then I did what's called a postdoc, and you're probably even less familiar with what that is. That's basically more training. And the idea of the postdoc is you want to get more training in kind of a somewhat different field. So I loved RNA, and so I decided that I was going to leave yeast behind and start working on some viruses and human cells. And so I worked in the lab at Yale University of a woman named Joan Stites. She's amazing. She is a pioneering woman in science. Have you guys heard of Watson and Crick? They discovered the double helix, and she did her PhD with James Watson, and she did her postdoc with Crick. Okay. She was one of the first, if not the first, female faculty member at Yale to have her own lab. And she's won basically every prize except for the Nobel Prize. I mean, she's won them all. She's amazing. But the purpose of a postdoc is to get more training, get more publications, and if you want to go the academic route, to kind of set up your own career, to kind of get a research project that you can take with you, from that lab to set up, to kind of seed your own lab. And that's what I did. Oh, I just have to say this. My 2 mentors were great. And if I can give you any advice, the two pieces of advice: get into a lab if you want to do this, and interact with great mentors. People who are going to challenge you, push you. You don't want to push over, but also support you. And both of my mentors were great at that. So then, after being a postdoc, I became a professor at UT Southwestern. Again, this is my group. I was going to say something about, we can come back if we have time at the end. I'll talk a little bit more about what we do if you want to, but I'm going to skip that for now because I think the last part of the talk is actually the most critical. And, again, I'm not just a narcissist. I didn't tell my story because, it's about me. Really, this was my path, but every path is unique. And I want to kind of give some different versions of that and just kind of let you guys know kind of what's out there. Even within the academic world, let's forget about industry and all that. Your endpoints can differ. So, I'm a professor, but and I talked about postdocs and grad students. They're training positions, so they're not really endpoints. But you can also be like a lab manager or a research scientist. And let's go back to this picture of my lab from a little while ago. This is Olga. Olga is my longtime lab manager. She has a BS degree. She does not have more than that. And she is kind of my right-hand person. She does kind of some of the logistics in the lab, but she also does experiments, and she's really good at it, okay? So I basically tell her what experiment to run, and she goes away and she does it, and she brings me data. It's great. Okay, so that's a type of position that we didn't talk about earlier. And Julio here, Julio was a research scientist. So research scientist is a position where after you have your PhD, if you have more of a permanent type of position in a lab, but kind of at an advanced level where you have some more independence, that would be a research scientist. No one on this picture is actually an undergrad. But labs will particularly, so at UT Southwestern, it's a little tougher because we don't have an undergraduate population. But at other places, undergrads will work in labs for credit. The other thing that folks will do is at UT Southwestern, we do have a SURF program, and this is a summer undergraduate research fellowship. So basically, you can go and you can apply to these programs. Lots of research universities have these. And you can actually work in a lab for a summer, okay? And they're paid, so, that wasn't available to me back in the day. So what about you? So you came from your hometown, wherever that may be, and now you're at Tarrant County. So after this, in order to get more research experience, if you're interested in going into molecular biology, of course, you'll want to go to a four-year college, and when you do that, you'll want to actually get research experience in a lab. And again, that's one of the big points. Get yourself into a lab because that's where you learn how to do what is actually science and academic science, if that's what you're interested in. Then you might want to do what's called a post-bac, and effectively that's what I did at NIH. So it's after you get your BS degree, but before you go back to graduate school. And again, to shamelessly plug UT Southwestern, we have a wonderful post-bac program that just started, and it's called the PB to PhD program. And basically, you get 1 or 2 years of mentored research experience in a lab. And again, it's kind of a gap year or 2 between the time that you're an undergraduate, and it kind of, hopefully it will do for you what my experience at NIH did for me. Even if it, you choose that this is not the career for you, that's fine. It's a lot better to do that, to figure that out during a post-bac program than it is in your second or third year of grad school, because then, you really are kind of beyond the point of, well, you can leave graduate school, but, that doesn't feel good, So it's good to think about these things earlier. So then what's after the postdoc? Well, you could go to grad school. You could get a master's degree and a PhD. You could either do that directly or, master's then PhD. And again, this is if you follow a similar kind of postdoc to professor route, this is wide open. But you don't have to do that. And you can still be a really productive member of the scientific community without doing that. At any one of these steps I have circled, you can then go do some of those other jobs in academics, be a research associate or a research scientist. The other thing that I haven't said a single word about is industry jobs. There's the pharmaceutical industry as well as biotech. And basically, you can go from any of these positions and get jobs that are going to pay more than academia. And even from the professor level, and I have colleagues who do this. They leave academia and go into these biotech and pharmaceuticals. And we can, if you have questions about that, we can talk more about that. There are also a lot of non-research opportunities. Teaching at a place that's not a research-heavy institution. That's a great thing to do. Science writing. There are people who get PhDs and go into like science policy and kind of, they're dealing. We have former students who are up on Capitol Hill trying to advise Congress people. And even business. You're certainly not doing science in a lab in this case, but a lot of businesses love scientific training. My most recent student to graduate, she was fantastic. She could have done anything. She's now working for BCG Consulting Group, okay? And she's, working very hard and I'm sure making tons of money. But she's not doing active bench work either. And the other thing I'll just point out very quickly is these steps don't have to be continuous. They're drawn with these arrows here. Don't let that kind of fool you. We have lots of students who take years off to do things, starting a family or family hardships, folks who do military service. We heard that a little bit earlier. At any one of these arrows where they kind of go off and do these other things and then come back. And so that's it. I think timing is about right here. So my take-home messages here are RNA is awesome. It's a message. It's a machine. It's a genome. It's a therapy, and it may be your ancestor. The advice is look for opportunity. There's lots of opportunities to work in molecular biology. Get lab experience. And I didn't put it up here, but find good mentors is another wonderful thing. Well, actually, I did put it up. Reach out to mentorships, including me. So if you're actually thinking about this, like if this is a serious consideration for you, like if you're thinking about, pursuing a lab thing at a four-year college, or if you're thinking about going to grad school, or even just, doing some lab work now, there's my information. If you don't have that memorized, you can just kind of Google stalk me and you'll find me. And I will be happy to talk to any of you. And that's it. Thank you.
So we have a few minutes for questions. And so I'm going to, if you have questions, just raise your hand. Don't just blurt out because we're trying to record this. And so if you have a question, please raise your hand. And I'll come and bring you the mic for Dr. Conrad. Any questions? Okay.
I just wanted to know what kind of research do you do at your lab?
So what we do is we do virology, but we work actually with the DNA virus. And I could go back. It's almost like I planted that question. I did not do that, but thanks anyway. So really, the virus we work on mostly is a virus called Kaposi sarcoma-associated herpes virus. And this causes a disease, a type of cancer called Kaposi sarcoma. It's very, very associated with HIV/AIDS patients. You may have heard that AIDS doesn't kill people, it's the opportunistic pathogens that kill people. This is one of those pathogens. And we do still look at it from an RNA perspective, even though it's a DNA virus. And the idea is here, again, you've got a viral DNA to RNA to protein scheme. And as it turns out, for various reasons that are way too complicated to get into, viral RNAs can be targeted by the host RNA degradation machinery. In other words, the human cell recognizes that and degrades it. And of course, that means no RNA, no protein, right? But if that were the end of the story, there would be no virus, right? Because the virus can't do that. So basically, the virus has figured out ways to fight back. And we study those mechanisms by which the virus degrades, or by which the host degrades the RNA and the virus protects its RNA. So that's like the short version of what we do.
Wow.
Yeah. Thank you for the question.
I need my glasses. Just a second.
Could you discuss more about the 2023 Nobel Prize? Okay. I told you what they won the Nobel Prize for was actually to, actually I guess we don't really need to go to that, wasn't really for the idea of the RNA vaccines themselves. That has been around for a long time. Again, kind of conceptually, that's a pretty easy concept. It's like, well, if we can put a piece of RNA in there, we can make protein, and if we can make whatever protein we want, boy, there's lots of diseases we could attack with that strategy. What they actually won the Nobel Prize for was helping that piece of RNA not be detected by the immune system. And the main trick that they used, there's multiple, but the main trick that they used was that, there's 4 bases, the G's, A's, T's, and C's. Well, first of all, on RNAs, it's G's, A's, U's, and C's, okay? And the U's, they actually added what's called a modification. So the U's that they use are called pseudouridines instead of uridines. And pseudouridines actually occur in cells. They're not, some people say that they're not natural. They're actually very natural. There's plenty of RNAs that have pseudouridines in them. But for some reason, if you use pseudouridines instead of uridines in those RNAs, the immune system says, that's good. That's not a foreign, that's not an invader. And it also helps to stabilize the RNA as well. So for those reasons, that was kind of like the conceptual thing that they came up with that really started to help these RNA vaccines or RNA therapies in general be kind of practical, because if your immune system, it destroys them as soon as they get into the cells, they're not much good, right? So I hope that answers that question.
Any other questions? Okay, wait for the microphone and speak loudly.
So my question is, with majoring, being in the STEM field, it being so hard and so rigorous, what type of advice would you give to students who are doing so, but they find it difficult, finding that, I guess, that refire and continuing school?
Yeah. Where do you get the fire in the belly?
Yeah.
That's one of the things that there's 2 answers to that. The first answer is that's the one thing that can't be mentored into you. If you don't have that drive, it's not, I always say, I can teach you, if you come to my lab and you are willing to learn, I can teach you to do all the techniques we do. And if you have a certain amount of interest and intellectual capacity, I can teach you the theoretical part of it too, or at least I can help you to learn that. The drive is something I can't teach you. That has to come from the individual. But one thing that I did find helpful, and this is about that roller coaster. when I was going through some hardships, and luckily I had a wonderful support system at home, I was going through some hardships. Boy, that imposter syndrome really hit me hard. And I had one quick paper, but it wasn't a very substantial paper. And I just didn't see where my next paper was coming from. And I was like, oh crap, I'm never going to graduate, or I'm going to have to leave here and, have just kind of a wimpy PhD, not a very productive one. And that was very hard. You don't have to go through that. And the reason why is I think we're a lot more conscious of that being a barrier. As a matter of fact, there's a wonderful TED Talk out there by a guy named Uri Alan, where he talks about what he calls the cloud. And I recommend everyone who's interested in science and graduate school, go watch this. So, and he went through a similar crisis. And he realized that part of the problem for him was that we teach science that you have hypothesis A, you ask that question, and you go to point B. Okay? It's a straight line. And when he was in graduate school, he was going through all the same trials and tribulations. And at some point, and he almost dropped out, and at some point he realized that's not the way science ever works. It's not because he was incompetent. It's not because I was incompetent that I had all these problems. It's because I thought it was supposed to go from here to here. And what he points out is he says what usually happens in science is you start at point A, you're trying to get to point B, and then he has a chalkboard and he draws this real squiggly line, okay? And he says, and then you actually come out at point C. So you don't ever get to point B. And he calls that big squiggly line, he calls that the cloud. And for me, I wish when I was a graduate student that somebody told me about the cloud. Because it wouldn't have made the science any easier. You still have to get in there and you get your butt into lab and do the hard work that it takes. Do the hard work and the hard thinking. It doesn't come easy, even with knowing that. But honestly, I think if I would have known that was the norm, it would have done my kind of spirits a lot better to know that was the case, okay? And to know it wasn't me, this is what's supposed to happen. As a matter of fact, if you do a project where you go from point A to point B, it's probably pretty pedestrian. You actually want to get in the cloud. In the cloud is where it matters. Yeah.
Let's thank Dr. Conrad for his time here. This has been wonderful. Thank you very much. I want to invite a very important person, Dean Bowling, up to help us make some presentations. And so this is Dr. Greta Bowling, our Dean of Math and Sciences.
Hello. So I want to thank you all for coming tonight. This is really important, and I think that it's a great way to kick off this semester. And the last thing you said was so important because there aren't a lot of straight lines, especially in grad school. And I think that there's this misconception that when you're in high school, you kind of know what you want to be when you grow up, and then you get to college and you follow this very straight path. And I can promise you, it is not straight. And even those of us standing here before you today, we still aren't 100% sure that we are where we want to be, right? I may still want to be something else when I grow up. Exactly. Yeah. Yep, exactly. So if you're in a place where you feel like you're maybe in a cloud, that's a good place to be, right? It's a place of discovery. So you're in good company for sure. So this first, okay. All right. So we want to offer a very small token of our appreciation to Dr. Conrad for coming this evening, just to kind of commemorate the event and to say thank you. So this is for you, and another hand for Dr. Conrad. Thank you. Something to remember us by.
We have a shirt. This is a medium, but if you need a large, we can get a large. But I know the guy in the picture needed a medium. I need a large. Okay. So we have a large and we have another. So you can take two, one for your.
Ah, lovely wife. There you go. Thank you. Thank you. Anything else we want to do? That's it. All right. So we again appreciate you all for coming, and those in the overflow room, thank you as well. If you want to ask some more questions of Dr. Conrad or his lovely wife, please stick around and have those conversations. And we'll see you next month when we. Oh yeah, here. Let us tell you about next month.
Thank you. Thank you, Dean Bowling. Next month, we have a wonderful STEM So What session. Horticulture is the host department, and they have invited a guest speaker. She is local, but she is a very special individual. She has roots in the Osage Native American area, and so she is going to talk about the contribution. Next month is Native American Month. And so she is going to talk about the contribution of the Osage tribe to horticulture, science, engineering, and all of that. And so please plan to join us for that conversation. It will be on November 16th and in this room, and you will get posters and announcements about that. So thank you for coming. I hope you were inspired. I hope you were informed. I hope that you engaged and felt a sense of belonging. So thank you very much. Thank you.